I'll defend him. The courtroom froze. Every head turned toward the voice, sharp, unwavering, and absolutely not where it should have come from. A young black woman stood at the back, still wearing her housekeeper's apron. Sweat clung to her brow. A battered folder was clutched to her chest. "Who is she?" someone whispered. "Probably the cleaning lady." Next thing you know, the janitor takes the bench. Laughter rippled, but she didn't flinch. Because Maya Johnson wasn't here to amuse anyone. She was here to tear the system apart, one page of truth at a time. Maya Johnson wasn't supposed to be here. Not in court, not in the headlines, not in anyone's version of power. At 25, she had already lived 3 lives. One as a top law student at Columbia, one as a dropout who couldn't afford her father's hospital bills, and one as a housekeeper dusting staircases lined with oil paintings worth more than her entire childhood. She didn't complain. Each morning she tied her apron and showed up at the Walker estate, where silence was golden and eye contact was discouraged. To the Walkers she was a name on the schedule, nothing more. But Maya had a secret. Tucked beneath the sink in the pantry was a milk crate filled with casebooks, court transcripts, and highlighters. She studied during her break shifts. She downloaded free trial law lectures. She took notes while scrubbing marble floors. 3 years of unpaid education powered by YouTube and grit. They saw Maid, but she was building something, and the irony, she knew more about the lawsuit against Douglas Walker, her cold, commanding billionaire employer, than anyone in his fancy legal team ever bothered to check. She just didn't know she'd be the one to stand up and defend him. Not yet. I'll defend him. The moment the words left Maya's lips, the courtroom twisted around like a living thing. Heads turned, mouths parted, phones rose into the air, and then came the laughter. Some chuckled, others full-on laughed. She's wearing an apron. Did she wander in from the kitchen? What's next? The janitor taking the bench? Maya stood her ground, one hand gripping the frayed folder against her chest. The courtroom smelled of cologne-polished wood and privilege. It wasn't built for her, and everyone in the room wanted her to remember that. Douglas Walker, seated at the defendant's table in a custom suit worth her year's wages, turned slowly toward her. His jaw tightened. His voice came out sharp. "You should be home scrubbing baseboards, not playing dress-up in a courtroom." Another wave of laughter. She should have left. Any sane person would have. But Maya took one step forward. "I've studied every page of this case, every contract, every record. I know it better than anyone in this room." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Miss Maya Johnson, Your Honor. I attended Columbia Law. I left after 2 years due to financial hardship. Since then I've worked as household staff, but I've never stopped studying, especially this case." Lauren West, the prosecutor in a navy suit tailored like armor, stood abruptly. "Objection. This is highly irregular and borderline insulting to the court." The judge didn't look away from Maya. He rubbed his chin. "If Mr. Walker consents, I will allow Miss Johnson to represent him for this preliminary session, under supervision." Douglas scoffed. "You want me to trust a maid with 30 million on the line?" Maya stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I may not have a license, but I'm the only one in this room not trying to bury you." For the first time, Douglas didn't respond with mockery. He just stared, and after a long moment, he muttered, "Fine, do your worst." The laughter had quieted, but the weight of judgment hadn't. Maya stepped behind the defense table, unfolding her worn folder like it was a sacred text. Pages filled with color-coded tabs, handwritten notes, and printed contract drafts spilled out in sharp contrast to the sleek briefcases and polished tablets of those around her. Lauren West smirked, arms crossed. "I hope you brought more than highlighters and grocery lists." Maya looked up, her voice calm. "I brought logic and receipts." A ripple of surprise moved through the gallery. Even the judge leaned back, intrigued. Maya raised a highlighted clause. "Your Honor, on March 12th. Mr. Walker's company revised a joint venture with Alter Holdings. The prosecution claims he forged that revision. But this digital signature," she pointed, "comes from an IP address in Zurich, not New York." She held up a second document. "And this clause, It doesn't match the language used in any of Mr. Walker's previous contracts. It mirrors phrasing common in European legal drafting, not American. Lauren interjected, voice tight. Coincidence. Maya didn't blink. Or conspiracy. The room held its breath. The judge tapped his pen thoughtfully. This is compelling. We'll recess until tomorrow for review. Miss Johnson returned then. Pending review. As Maya stepped away from the defense table, folder in hand, a silence followed her. No longer mockery, something else. Douglas watched her lips press together. Still skeptical, still bitter. But for the first time, he didn't look like a man alone. And Maya, for the first time, felt seen. That night, the courtroom still echoed in Maya's ears. Back in her tiny basement apartment in Newark, she sat at the same chipped kitchen table where she used to help her little brother with math homework while stirring a pot of soup. Now the table was covered in contracts, sticky notes, and a half-eaten grilled cheese sandwich. Her apron still hung on the back of the chair, stained from the morning shift at the Walker estate. Her fingers were sore from scrubbing marble. Her mind on fire. On her laptop, an old trial law lecture played softly, barely audible, over the hum of the refrigerator. She took a sip of cold coffee and flipped through the contract again, the same one Lauren West had tried to weaponize in court. There it was, a clause, slightly off. The phrasing didn't match the structure in Douglas Walker's other deals. It used terms that felt foreign, intentionally crafted. She jotted a note, compare with prior contracts, European legal phrasing. Then her phone buzzed. Unknown number. A pause. Then a voice, low, amused, dangerous. You turned the room upside down today. But be careful, Maya. You're poking a bear. The call ended. She stared at the screen for a long moment. Fear crept in, cold and familiar. But she didn't flinch. She'd grown up in fear. But fear didn't stop her then. And it wouldn't stop her now. The next morning, Maya returned to the Walker estate before sunrise. She wasn't expected. Douglas barely glanced up when she appeared at the office door in her gray cardigan and faded jeans. I didn't ask for a meeting, he said. You also didn't ask to have your name dragged through federal mud, she replied, voice steady. He studied her for a moment, then gestured toward the chair without a word. Maya sat and laid out the contract draft again. There's a clause, she said, pointing. It doesn't match any of the other legal language your company has ever used. And the signature? I was in Napa that week, Douglas interrupted. Wine conference. My assistant usually preps documents. I just clicked. Paul Temple. He nodded. Maya's brow furrowed. Where is he now? He left last month. Said he needed space. Or distance, she thought. That afternoon she took the subway to Midtown and found the old co-working building where Paul had rented a shared office. Most doors were closed. His was slightly ajar. Inside, paper-scattered drawers, open coffee burned onto the desk. A laptop charger still plugged in, but no device. He'd left in a hurry. As she turned to leave, something caught her eye. A single folder left near the trash bin. 3 versions of the contract. 2 of them listed different metadata, one traced to Zurich, the other New Jersey. Her fingers trembled as she held the copies. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a setup. Back in her apartment, Maya sat at her kitchen table staring at the contract copies. Her hands were still cold from the subway, but her mind burned hot. She filed the Zurich and New Jersey drafts into her binder and began sketching a timeline. Dates, IP logs, language changes. The pieces were starting to form a shape. Then another buzz. Unknown number. She answered. Silence. Then the same voice as before. You're clever, but you don't know who you're dealing with. Keep going and you'll find out the hard way. Click. Maya stared at the phone. Her heart pounded. Not with panic, but with clarity. She encrypted backup copies of everything and slipped one into a hollowed-out book on her shelf, another in the freezer behind a bag of frozen peas, just in case. The next morning a new message came in, this time from an unlisted email. Subject line. I need to talk to you. It's not just you they're trying to bury. The sender, Elise Romero. junior analyst, Alter Holdings. They met in a crowded cafe downtown Elise, clutching a messenger bag like it held her spine. I've seen the internal memos, Elise whispered. Martin Lyles, he told us to reroute IPs. He said we needed to create legal pressure. I didn't realize what I was doing until I saw your face on the news. Maya leaned in. Why now? Elise's eyes filled with tears. Because I couldn't sleep anymore, and because they made it clear. You're not the only one they'll hurt. Maya nodded slowly. For the first time, she wasn't alone in the dark, and for the first time, the truth had a second voice. The courtroom felt different this time. Maya entered without flinching, her binder pressed against her chest like armor. The gallery, once amused by her presence, now watched her with quiet tension. Even Douglas, stoic as ever, gave her a brief nod. Across the room, Lauren West strutted in like nothing had changed. But Maya noticed the difference. Her eyes didn't hold the same sharp arrogance. Her suit was perfect, but her balance had shifted. Ready for round two, Counselor Lauren said with a sweet, cutting smile. Maya didn't blink. More than you know. She laid the documents on the table. Zurich and New Jersey versions, metadata logs, IP trace summaries, a signed affidavit from a digital forensics firm. Then she stood and addressed the court. Your Honor, the prosecution's case hinges on a forged contract, but these metadata reports prove two versions were created, one from an IP address in Zurich, the other in New Jersey. Neither was generated from Mr. Walker's secure server. She held up the pages, her voice clear. And the clause that allegedly implicates my client uses terminology common in European contract law, not U.S. standards. It was planted, intentionally. Lauren stood abruptly. I object. Chain of custody is unclear. This could have been manufactured. Maya didn't flinch. It wasn't, and the affidavit confirms it. The copies were retrieved from Paul Temple's office. He disappeared days ago, but we found his trail. The judge leaned forward. This is no longer just fraud. We may be looking at conspiracy. A ripple passed through the courtroom. Douglas leaned closer, his voice barely audible. You didn't just shake their foundation. You cracked it wide open. Maya didn't smile. I'm not here to shake things, she whispered. I'm here to make sure no one builds lies on broken ground again. By the time court recessed, the reporters were already waiting. Maya stepped outside into the cold wind, her binder still clutched tight. Cameras flashed. Microphones swarmed. A voice called out from the crowd. Miss Johnson, is it true you were a maid before taking this case? She paused. Yes, she said clearly. I was, and I still clean the same kitchen 3 nights a week. Some reporters chuckled, unsure if she was joking. Maya leaned into the mic. Let me be clear, I didn't need $1,000 suit or a corner office to see injustice. All I needed was my voice and the truth. The crowd fell silent, then applause scattered, but real. That night, the headline broke, The Maid Who Might Take Down a $1 billion Empire. It wasn't what Maya would have chosen, but it was what the world understood. Messages flooded in. From janitors, nurses, single moms. You reminded me who I used to be. My daughter watched you speak, and now she wants to study law. You made me believe again. But not all attention was welcome. That evening she returned home to find a white envelope slid under her apartment door. No name, no address, just a plain sheet of paper. You've made enemies. Be careful what hill you choose to die on. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She burned the note in the sink, and then she got back to work. The Walker estate was quiet that evening. Douglas sat behind his desk, a decanter half full, untouched. His usual composure, polished coal detached, was fraying at the edges. When Maya entered, he stood. I saw the news, he said. You've become something else. She didn't smile. I didn't do this for the spotlight. He nodded. I know. That's why it worked. She stepped forward, laying down a folder, more internal documents. Email threads between Paul Temple and Martin Lyles. Late-night approvals. Legal red lines with Lyles' initials. Douglas scanned them, then leaned back. His voice was lower this time. I gave Paul everything. I let him sit at the table. Thought he was loyal. Maya looked him in the eye. Loyalty built on silence isn't loyalty. It's leverage. He absorbed that. You've done more for me in a week than my entire legal team did in a year. I'm not doing this for you, she said again, not harshly, just truthfully. I'm doing it for people like me who were never invited to the table, so I dragged my own chair through the door. A pause. Then for the first time he said it not as a billionaire, but as a man who finally saw her. You're brilliant, Maya, and I was too blind to notice. She didn't need him to say more. Respect was enough, and for the first time it felt like healing had begun. A month later the courtroom was gone. The headlines faded, the noise distant, but Maya was still working. She stood in a small rented space above a laundromat in Harlem. No marble floors, no security guards, just a fold-out table, a second-hand printer, and a cheap coffee maker that sputtered like it was out of breath. On the wall hung a single sign, The People's Law Project, free legal guidance for every worker. It wasn't a law firm, not yet, but it was something better, a beginning. In the first week, 5 people came in. A home health aide who'd been denied overtime. A janitor fired after reporting unsafe conditions. A mother facing eviction over a lease she couldn't read. Maya listened, explained, translated legal jargon into real words, and when needed stood beside them in court. Douglas offered funding. She refused a salary. Use it for resources, she said, not for me. He didn't argue. Instead, he helped her open 3 more satellite offices, Brooklyn, Queens, Newark. Maya didn't wear suits. She wore sweaters and soft shoes. But when she spoke, people listened, because they knew she came from where they were, and she hadn't forgotten. On the wall beside the sign, she'd taped a small quote, handwritten, underlined twice. Justice isn't charity, it's alignment, and everyone deserves to be seen by the law. 1 year later, Maya stood at the front of a small makeshift courtroom. No judge's bench, no jurors, just rows of folding chairs filled with bus drivers, baristas, housekeepers, nannies, and night shift workers. People who looked like her. People who had been overlooked like her. Behind her hung a hand-painted sign, The People's Law Project. Year 1, 400 consultations, 117 court wins, 0 voices ignored. She didn't wear robes or designer suits, just a navy sweater, jeans, and a calm, clear voice. Most of you know my story, she began, and if you don't, you've probably heard someone else tell it louder than I ever intended it to be told. A ripple of laughter, but it quieted quickly. I never planned to be a lawyer. I planned to survive, to stay quiet. But then I saw something wrong, and I spoke. She paused. Justice isn't a courtroom. It's a choice. It happens in kitchens, on loading docks, in janitor closets, wherever someone says, no, this isn't right. At the back of the room, Douglas stood silently, Elise beside him, now working as a staff advocate. The mural behind them showed Maya in her apron arms, crossed the word she didn't ask for permission. After the gathering, a young woman approached. I want to do what you did, she said, holding a crumpled book on civil rights law. Maya smiled and handed it back. Then start by listening. The law is just ink. The real power is your voice.